Hello, everyone. Sorry for the technical difficulties that we faced. We started the webinar on a system and which unfortunately collapsed right in the middle. So this is unfortunately becoming a regular thing. I think we need to come up with a better solution and make sure that this is never repeated again. So I'm sincerely very apologetic for that. But our next mentor is ready with his presentation, and hopefully for his presentation we will not face any other difficulties. So without wasting further time, I'm going to ask Cal to start talking about his presentation.
And thanks, Sarah. I hope you can all see me, so please send through if you've got any sort of troubles with seeing anything, but I expect that we're right on track now, so thank you for your patience. So my name's Cal. I'm an Atlas Core Fellow from Australia. A bit of history about myself. So I was formerly a teacher for a couple of years, and then I worked at a non-profit called the Foundation for Young Australians, where I primarily led policy about myself. So I was around for work. So we pulled together data, international data from the UK, from the US, and then applied it to an Australian context. And had a look at what are like the major trends that are particularly does this affect young people. So this is the context to this presentation, and I'm going to give you a bit of a rundown of the research that I've done previously. It's not just relevant to young people, you know, aged 18 to 30, which some of you in that category. It's also relevant to you now. As mid-career professionals, the workforce is changing rapidly. You know, and think about some of those trends and what you can do yourself to try to adapt to that change. So I'll pull up the presentation now and we can get started. Trends and questions too, and feedback. So work is changing. Rethink your career. Careers are an exciting thing, but they're also quite scary. Former background, and I was asking students at age 15, what do you want to be when you grow up? Now that's a huge question, and one that when I was that age, I couldn't really answer either. But it's an expectation in society that you're able to answer that sort of question. You're asked at quite an early age, and sometimes even earlier today, what are you going to do? How are you going to spend your time? What work do you want to do? This is a complex phenomenon, and it's becoming more complex as we're finding a sort of disrupted workplace with these big global trends affecting it. One bit of context before we get started on the presentation is a lot of the data comes from Australia. As much as possible, I've drawn on data from the US and the UK as well. Even though some of you will come from countries that are not in the same sort of economic context as the Australian economy or the US economy or the UK economy, global, and although they'll happen at different sort of paces and rates of change in different economies, this information will be relevant to you all. There might be just some slight little tweaks in the data and shifts in particular landscapes that will be relevant. But so there are three major global trends that are affecting work. Of a 2.5-year project that I worked on in Australia, where we looked at what is changing work and what will work look like. So these big trends are automation, globalization, and flexibility. Automation. So data from 2013 from Oxford Martin found that 1 in 2 US jobs are going to be disrupted by automation in the next 10 to 15 years. So let's break down what that looks like. They had a look at all the different jobs that exist, and they looked at the type of tasks that are primarily performed within those jobs, and they found that using current technology, you could replace those jobs because the skills used and the techniques used in those jobs could be done by a machine. So this research focused on the US was then also applied to Australia, to the UK. I know it's been done in many, many, many other contexts as well. So in 2013, this report launched, and ever since then, there's been a huge global conversation, which I'm sure all of you have been exposed to, around automation and the changing world of work. There's some different research which uses a different methodology. McKinsey and I believe the World Bank used this most recently. And that data showed that it's actually 1 in 10 jobs will be completely wiped out by automation in the next 10 to 15 years. So acknowledging that this is a prediction, it's not, there definitely will be 1 in 10 jobs wiped out, but what they did is they looked at all the different activities across all different jobs. And when you break down 1 in 10 jobs, you find that all the activities in 1 in 10 of those jobs will be wiped out. A lot of these jobs are in industries such as, mechanical labour, factory workers, people that are in production lines. Very easy to replicate that with robots. So they're 2 big stats that are quite scary. Another big trend that's affecting work is globalisation. So the research that we did in Australia found that 1 in 10 service jobs, and so service jobs, to give you some context, are retail, you're at a shop, you're selling something, it requires some sort of, usually some face-to-face interaction. But as you've seen with the, Amazon, for example, you can see that a lot of service jobs where people were directly buying goods of other people in shops as online. Also, because of the nature of the global workforce, you'll find that because labour is cheaper in particular countries, so you can give China as an example, you can give India, Philippines, for the Australian context. Those jobs are going overseas because it's a lot cheaper for organisations to pay for cheap workers overseas than it is in other countries such as Australia. Another massive global trend is flexibility. So what we found in the Australian context, and this is also found in many other contexts as well, is that 1 in 3 jobs are flexible already. That means 1 in 3 people are either working casual, part-time, or as contractors. So this is dramatically shifting the way in which we work, and we can see that it's happening now. So what does work look like? This was an article that came from Time magazine. Give me 1 second. Still on the same side. Okay. Give me 1 second. I'm going to try to fix up SlideShare. Pulling up now. Screen share. Apologies, everyone. Sharing. And going here. I'm just going to check in with Sarah afterwards as well. Still on the same side. Okay. That is cool. I walked you through those sections before. It's working now. Time magazine, a couple of years ago, came up with this stat, a big article that said, throw away your briefcase, you're not going to the office, you can kiss your benefits goodbye too. And your new boss won't look much like your old one. There's no longer a ladder, and you may never get to retire. There's a world of opportunity to figure out a new path. Now, this is what we predicted is the future of work 3 years ago. This is what work looks like now already. So as we can see, massive adjustment. Hierarchies maybe are not so important. Working in an office context is not as relevant. And you can see that with the data I was talking about with flexible work arrangements. A lot of people are working from home as well as in their office. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, because of the wages and the protections around their jobs, some people in particularly Australian context and the US context are working longer and longer and longer. They're not getting as many retirement benefits as well. So this is both an exciting opportunity because we get the opportunity to work in different contexts with different employers and different situations, but at the same time, we've got all of these potential negatives that are occurring at the moment. And the data shows that for a 15-year-old today, they're going to work 17 jobs over 5 industries. Now that's a dramatic shift from my parents' experience. They would study, as an accountant or a teacher, and then they would be in that career their whole life. They might make one shift, but they're basically at most in 2 industries. Today, this is the reality for us, and it's a reality for young people at the moment. There's many, many, many different jobs that people are doing, and it's going to require this adaptability, this flexibility to be able to move and shift and learn in new contexts. What this data also shows on like looking at the kind of jobs that exist and looking at the shifts that are happening is that employers are shifting their expectations about what they want from people in the workplace. So some data that I pulled together with my organisation showed that based off 3 million job ads, we had a look in detail at what sort of skills employers were looking at. And we found that these skills that we call enterprise skills, but are often also called soft skills or social skills or 21st century learning skills, and these include creativity, communication, problem solving, critical thinking, are increasingly demanded by employers. And we did a survey of employers, and what we found is not only do they want these skills more than ever before, but they actually will pay people more. So if you've got the skill as an excellent presenter, employers will often pay you, based off job ads, $7,000 more than someone who does not have. You see that the actual skills required for jobs is shifting as well. What does this mean? Like if you look at the automation data, you'll find that smarter machines are performing human tasks. And if you look at the trends, the trajectories on what type of skills are going to be knocked out of the workplace and what sort of skills are being prioritised into the future, you can see this new spread of jobs. So as I mentioned before, the automation data found that very easily, process-oriented work that takes low cognitive skill ability and is easy to repeat, such as working on a machine operation, they're the jobs of the past because they're the ones that are most likely to be automated. If you look at like clerical work or admin work, even lawyers, accountants, those types of jobs are increasingly going to be thrown in the bin or are going to be dramatically reshifted. The skills that computers can't do, robots can't do, you'll find that it involves social skills, communication skills, networking, critical thinking, problem solving. So being able to be a manager is increasingly going to be important, and it's the kind of job that exists now and will exist into the future. Community and personal services. So an example in Australia, 2 of the largest growing sectors for jobs are as teachers and nurses, because it's very, very hard to replicate that with a robot. And I'm not sure people are looking for robots to be their teacher anytime soon. And this is real. This is happening right now. If you look at, and it's real and it affects particular populations. So there's winners and losers in this story of automation and shifting work. What we found within the data is that the kind of jobs that young people do when they enter the workforce, such as working at a supermarket where you're learning communication skills, where you're learning how to deal with money, it's the kind of job that credentializes you to work in a more professional job later on and helps you move along that sort of ladder of a career. Those jobs are being absolutely wiped out, and you will have seen that already happening. We've now got self-checkouts. Another excellent example of jobs being replaced is in shoe production. So while formerly we had shoe production move from countries like the United States to China because of cheap labour, we've found those jobs are now actually moving to Germany again because Germany is investing money into machines that can actually produce those shoes. So again, that, producing shoes is not the most sort of valuable, rewarding work you'll ever do, but it is the kind of job that may potentially support you, brackets, and it's a hard industry to shift from if you've not had an education to help you make that shift. So what we're seeing is there's definitely winners and losers in these sort of games. In factory workers, for example, in Australia, I found that particularly middle-aged to older men who didn't go to university originally are the ones that have completely exited the job market. So there's a lot of discussion in Australia of how do we reskill them, retrain them, but it's not as easy as just going, go to another university degree when you've got a family to support. There's a lot of shifts that have to take place for you to be able to move from working in a factory to working in an office environment. And so one thing to keep in mind as global service leaders that we are is that these big shifts may be exciting for some of us, but they're going to be losers in that process. So, what can we do about this? We've got these problems of automation, globalization, flexibility. The work that I did at the Foundation for Young Australians was looking at what kind of skills and capabilities are going to prepare us for this future work. And so we found that there was 4 sets of skills that were going to be important. Skills are like literacy and numeracy. They're always going to be important. You have to be able to speak the language of the day, whatever context you're in, and you have to be able to do basic arithmetic. Technical skills involve things such as methodology and discipline within a particular field. Or if you're moving into measurement and evaluation, you probably need to study that as well. There's specific skill sets that are relevant to specific roles. Both these skill sets are going to be important now and into the future. But it's not only these skills. There are these new sets of skills, or we could say skills that were always important but are even more important now, which include communication, problem solving, critical thinking. These are portable skills. They enable you to move between multiple different jobs. As I said, are increasingly demanding them. Then there's career management skills. So this is the topic which I'll get to later on, the ability to be able to manage a career where you're moving across 17 jobs, where you're moving across 5 industries. What do you want to get out of it? Like, what's your next step? This is a really high barrier ask, particularly if you're working with young people that are from disadvantaged backgrounds, which was the context in which I was working with. They don't necessarily know what those next jobs are, so they can't even get started and thinking about where they're going next. But these career management skills are going to be increasingly important. This creates a portfolio of skills. And this portfolio of skills will, if you develop them in the right way, prepare you actually for a whole stack of jobs that already exist. So this is actually the good news. If you're able to develop strong critical thinking, problem solving, if you have basic literacy and numeracy skills, or like competent or advanced numeracy and literacy, if you have the ability to think about your career and move across it, and if you have some technical discipline based off the industry you're working in, you will find that in the Australian context, and I know this is relevant to other contexts as well, that one job prepares you with the skills for 13 other jobs. So we did a massive mapping of jobs based off job ads and found that actually, if you have these skills, you've got this portfolio that prepares you for multiple different jobs in multiple different contexts. So a lot of this has got to do with the fact of thinking about what's going to be important, as I mentioned, these portfolio, and then realizing that you've got more potential than you think you originally had. You can move across to different industries, you can move across different jobs, but there is some work in actually communicating that to employers. Give me one sec. One other really critical thing that you can do right now, and you can do to prepare young people, is thinking about the jobs that actually exist today and will exist in the future. So I've already run through this a little bit. There's the jobs that are more likely to be chucked out the window over time or dramatically shifted as automation comes through. And there's jobs that are more likely to exist in the future than require social skills. Is actually know where those jobs are. And so career advisors in Australia don't necessarily do this very well. And a lot of my work in Australia was trying to explain that the job market's shifting, and although people think there are jobs in particular industries, there may not be those jobs. So for example, in Australia, I can tell you based on the jobs data that if you want to become a teacher or a nurse, generally that's a growing industry and you'll be able to move into that sort of job. But my advice here of what you can do and how you can prepare applicants for jobs is actually talking to people in the industry. Ask a lawyer, is there jobs in law? Because I can tell you that they're shifting. What's that? You can, okay, yeah, great. Give me one sec. So how do we prepare for this future? What are we going to do? 2 minutes? Great, excellent. There is 3 things that you can do right now to prepare you for what's coming. And these are steps that I'm using on myself at the moment. I recognize that thinking about a complex career where you're moving across lots of different industries and lots of different jobs is really hard. that these are 3 steps that you can take right now. I'm keen to hear your feedback on whether it works or not, because I'm using it on myself to help prepare you for this complex changing workforce. So one thing is I would suggest have a look at 80,000 Hours. This is an excellent career resource. It came from the UK and it's a 12-step career guide. It is based upon you wanting to make a difference in the world. So thinking about what's the best impact that you can have. People. They use that as the starting point. Then they ask you questions like, what stage are you in your career? So you maybe, if you're at your early stage of your career, you shouldn't necessarily be focusing on doing a job that you're best at. What you should probably be doing is developing skills. So maybe you study, maybe you start a job which exposes you to different types of skills. One other thing you should be doing at an early stage career is building your network, because later on, when you get into your mid to end career, you will actually be able to have a lot more impact if you've developed that network. A really important thing you can do is develop your LinkedIn. So a recent stat I read was that 70% of resumes, CVs, are not read by people. Computer algorithms are now sifting through every single person's job, like CVs and resumes, and that is now critical to get your LinkedIn right, so you're prepared for that. My advice, and I give full credit to Abdul, who ran an excellent session on LinkedIn the other day, and I expect to probably run another one soon with fellows. Your future self to the world, not what you are now. So Abdul, I'm going to use Abdul's example. He could show the fact that he's in accounting at the moment and say, my expertise is accounting. Now that is true about Abdul, but his interest, his passion is about education. So he's going to showcase on his LinkedIn all the amazing work he's done in his community and in the US to prepare him for jobs in the education sector. One thing to think about, your LinkedIn is your future self, it's the job you're looking for. Finally, this is absolutely critical, build your network. And I don't mean cold networks where you shake hands, pass off a business card and never talk to someone again. I mean building genuine relationships with people that are passionate about the same areas you are and building those connections so you're prepared for future jobs. Seriously, the amount of jobs that are in the shadow or hidden job market is ridiculous. The amount of jobs that people get because they know someone is ridiculous. It's completely unfair, but it's the nature of work at the moment. And you will find it so much easier to be able to shift industries and you'll be able to move into jobs that are more relevant to your work if you build relevant connections with people around your passion. So my recommendation is if you want to work as a lawyer, and I have so many people, so many students, so many interns at Atlas calls saying, I want to study law, I want to do this, I want to do that. Now, law is an excellent degree and it's a great generalist degree. No, but the legal profession is being wiped by automation, significantly shifted. Lawyer. If you've got a parent who's a lawyer, that's great. That's really good for you. Other people don't. Talk to them. Say, hey, I'm really passionate about law. Can I talk to you about your job? And they'll be able to give you that real insight into their industry about what you should be doing. Thanks.
Thank you, Cal, for... I'm sorry, I'm interrupting right now. Just to give you a reminder that we have 6 minutes remaining. So if you want to wrap up your comments, so we could start out with the questions.
Questions?
Okay. I'm sorry, I was wondering if you're going to give some last minute statements. I have a question for you. We unfortunately don't have many coming from the fellows. But they even say that even your last degree, whichever one it is, whether it's an undergrad or it's a postgraduate degree, the validity of it is max 3 years, and then you should invest into some kind of new course, whether it's a 6-month or a new program or something of that sort, in order to keep in pace with what's happening around the world. Is that something that you agree with? And if yes, what suggestions do you have for all of us? Like you've been mentioning and you've been talking about, obviously how important it is to keep track of what's happening around the world in order to succeed in the job market. Do you think that would be the case in terms of your qualification as well, or do you agree to that?
Yeah, totally. So there's a recent report by the Foundation for Young Australians released only a couple of weeks ago, and they were looking at what is going to be required in this sort of future workplace. And again, they looked at many, many, many billions of hours of work, and they looked at what are the likely sort of skills and capabilities you're going to need. The capability in this new workforce is to be able to be a self-directed learner. So you're going to have to be able to reskill, relearn constantly. If you're moving between jobs, if you're moving between industries, you're going to have to be able to do courses, to be able to go back into study. One key point that I would put into this, having looked at the tertiary sector in a lot of detail, Australian context and internationally, is that universities do not one is pretty self-evident, they don't necessarily provide the degree to get you the job you want to have. University ranking internationally, if we use the market whether it's good university or not, is based off research citations. It's not based off the quality of the learning experience. So my advice is through this self-directed learning process is talk to people. So if you want to go and study in the US, if you want to study a master's in social entrepreneurship, for example, speak to someone who's done it, see where they got to. If you want to be a social entrepreneur, for example, as a job, speak to someone who's a social entrepreneur already, ask them what they did. If they did study a particular course and they got a lot of value out of it, go and do that. But don't base it off university rankings. Don't necessarily even base it off what your parents say you should do, which is awesome advice. Your parents love you, they want to look after you, they want to give you good advice. But unless they work in that industry, they're not the best person to speak to about moving into that industry. Don't necessarily be lawyers and doctors, but it's a lot of steps to get there. And there's a lot of advice you want to be getting from people in those sectors before you make a huge financial commitment. And in the US, this is stronger than, a bigger commitment than anywhere else. Like $60,000 degrees, $100,000 degrees. Before you put yourself in that situation, because the market's shifting, and if you can't get a job that's going to pay for that degree later on, you're going to be in a pretty awful situation. Does that answer your question?
See, it does. Abdul has asked another question. He's saying that, Cal, we all fellows go to different networking sessions. Do you have any suggestions how to get connected with those folks on LinkedIn for longer professional relationships?
Abdul, you're the expert on this, so I will take your advice on this as well. But my recommendation, similar to what I said before, is find your purpose. And I know a lot of us do have that in Atlas School, which is awesome. You know where you want to go. You know what issue that's important. Focus. Don't just network for the sake of it. Don't just go to random networking events. If you're passionate about the education sector, go to education sector events. Talk to people on LinkedIn that are in jobs that you want to be in at some point, or even people that you admire, that you want to work with. Talk to them. You can send them a message. One of the former interns at Atlas Core in my team, she messaged so many people on LinkedIn and said, I admire your work. I'd love to catch up. And that put her in such a good place to find a job when she finished her internship. So this is the advice I'm giving to all interns at Atlas Core, but it's just as relevant to me as it is to you as well. Look at people that are in the areas you're passionate about and in the areas that you want to develop. Don't just randomly network. Any other questions? I'm just going to
I think we're kind of done with the questions, and I would just want to thank you for an amazing session. I think this has definitely been very helpful. I know it's been very helpful for me, and I think I'm going to take a lot of things from it. So thank you for doing this for us, and apologies again for what happened with Disha. Disha is going to be recording her presentation again, and I will be sharing that link with you. So thank you, everyone. Have a great week, and I hope I'm seeing the majority of you today at the Holocaust event. See you.